When you think of Chad, how many images come to mind? The Chad meme, Roronoa Zoro, Iskandur, Jotaro Kujo, and many more. But none of these images come to mind, for me, before Sinbad, the King of Sindria, leader of the Seven Seas Alliance, and the first dungeon conqueror from Magi. You may ask, what makes him so special? Especially if he's from a show you've never heard of. What makes him so special requires some context, which will by the end of the video include spoilers for Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic manga and anime, as well as The Adventures of Sinbad anime and manga. This is a character study. I will give another warning for spoilers before they come up again, but there are good reasons to watch this even if you have not seen the show, because it might introduce you to this great character in this very underrated series and get you to watch it, which would be, honestly, the greatest thing that could happen. As there are two manga and anime we will be talking about, there are two separate introductions for Sinbad. The first is in the original Magi story, which is of him meeting the protagonist naked with a little leaf over his private parts on a road to a city with nothing to his name. He was robbed that night as he slept on the road, and some random perps just stole everything that he owned. What was stolen? All of his jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, and his sword. Normally, that wouldn't mean much, but in the world of Magi, where all of these objects are imbued with the power of Jin, giving him immense strength and power, he kind of lost it all. Despite all of it, it is implied that he is still the strongest man in the city, despite not having any of his magic. And this is also clear from a geopolitical standpoint. After being helped from his naked state into a slightly less naked state, he comes back to this grand city of Balbad, and he is incredibly rich feeling. He feels kingly, which is what he is. He's a king. And he immediately goes from there to a discussion with the king of this country, Balbad, about trade relations and how he wants to open them up and all this stuff. But it's clear that he has this power, that he is in this position with great authority, that is more important than this actual country's ruler. His work keeps the plot moving for the protagonists, but it is clear that is all within his calculations, which in the end of the first major arc are not completed. To the audience, it is obvious that he's being nice to them, since the protagonists are gonna, change the world, and it seems like he's kind of raising them as a father figure, especially the main character, Alibaba, who he spends a good portion of this arc being a mentor to. Quickly pause this little plot synopsis, because there's an important thing we need to talk about. Countries. Magi is set in a world where analogies of all sorts of empires and kingdoms from throughout ancient history are located. So, imagine all of the emperors you might have learned of in world history class. There is the Ram Empire, which is just the Roman Empire, the Ko Empire, which is Han China, the Balbad Empire, which is India, either Gupta or the other one. And there's Partavia, which is the Persian Empire, Magnostat, which is kind of weirdly like the Second and Third Reich, but with German Hogwarts. It's confusing. What matters is that Sinbad, in this ancient world, essentially creates NATO in an ancient world. He has the Seven Seas Alliance, which has things in it like collective defense, global trade, non-aggression pacts that forbid conquering other lands. Sindria, in this analogy, ends up becoming America, which I feel like I never realized properly until writing this video, but that's crazy. It's such a huge revelation that changes the way you view this story. that all of these empires are stuck in their ancient ways. And then, out of nowhere, America basically shows up and is like the promised land. Going back to the plot, the reason that you can tell that Sinbad is being nice to these protagonists, not only beyond their world altering protagonistness being on their side, one of them is a Magi, which is, the name of the show. A Magi is a sorcerer of creation, and Sinbad really wants one of those, because all of the great empires in their current world, the Rame Empire and the Ko Empire, have Magis. They are magicians with unlimited access to magic. They have like an infinite mana pool, basically, so they can cast crazy spells. And Aladdin is literally like 10. He knows nothing. He has learned two magic types, which is just shoot energy and fire. He is not a trained magician, so when they eventually leave Baldad and go to Thindria, which is, Sinbad's country founded by himself, and all the people who live there are Sinbad's family. All of the people that live there had to have been refugees from other countries, because Sinbad was not a king before. He was just a guy. He created this kingdom, and all the people that live there are first-generation citizens. As I was saying before with the United States analogy, Thindria is a utopia. It is a place of great dreams, and they wish that they can get this great prosperity thanks to Thindria. This devotion is even more true for the people around Sinbad himself. The 8 generals, which are just his really badass group of the best warriors in the country, are actually all kings and princes and princesses in their own rights, but they have all joined Sinbad because that's what he does to them. He's so cool that all of these main character level people join him. But you can tell that they're holding scars, that they're not just happy-go-lucky, that they have real character, and real events have changed how they are. And these scars will be the focus of the spoiler section. Just be ready for it. In Magi, these scars show themselves first with the introduction of one of the main characters, Ren Hakuryu, who's a prince of Ko who goes to Sinbad saying, "Hey, can you help me with this coup d'etat against the evil sorceress who is my mother who took over this kingdom?" Sinbad first says no, but wants him to focus on learning, since that's why he is in Thindria. He is like a foreign exchange student prince for the purpose of this arc. He doesn't want to make it seem like he wants world domination. The Seven Seas Alliance is a non-aggression pact that is made between countries that Sinbad just happens to be the leader of. He doesn't want them to just obliterate this giant empire. But at the same time, more or less, he's essentially seducing a princess who's Hakuryu's half-sister, Ren Kogyoku, which he's just leading her on, being really nice to her. He tests out her magic power in a really cool fight that kind of happens out of nowhere, where it just shows the people going all out. And in that, he uses one of his magic powers to use a sound attack that, incapacitates her and knocks her out in the fight. But it also sticks in her mind, and he permanently can hear whatever she hears at any point he wants. So he now has an unwilling spy on his side for the rest of the story, and it matters a lot that this happened. But that's not the key part here. The key part is that she ends up helping him when Thindria is attacked later in this arc, of her own free will. She's on his side in this case. She wants peace with his country. She is a peaceful warrior princess who doesn't want to have to fight. After that arc, he decides that he will help Hakuryu with his destruction of the Ko Empire, but not in the way he exactly wants, which is fine for now. He just says that if he needs help, he can call Sinbad, and Sinbad will help. After this scene, he's met by one of his closest advisors, Jafar, who says, "You are a bad man." It is this advisor who really informs the audience that Sinbad was controlling things in Balbad and what he really wanted out of it. You can kind of tell it beforehand, but it's only really clear here. Sinbad responds, "Have I become devious?" With all of the current protagonists of the story being optimistic about the shape of the world, he is low-key evil. His advisor responds, "Yes, Sinbad has become devious, because he has too many possessions that he turned into something he never wanted to be, but also that this was his choice to change the world." Sinbad is a complex character who is staring at the deep darkness of the abyss, and all that abyss does is stare even deeper into him. He's also like super duper badass. In the combat system of Magi, people use the power of metal vessels to channel the power of legendary magicians, the Jinn. Sinbad was the very first person to claim this power at the age of 14, and he also was the first to discover how to use it, as well as the holder of the most metal vessels, and so many that he can't claim anymore. He is a master of Mogui manipulation, which is like basically ki or haki from One Piece or Dragon Ball, which is kind of combined without some of the aspects, but it's just like, oh, I punch harder because of Mogui manipulation. Like, you get it, it makes sense. And he commands the largest alliance of metal vessel users with the Seven Seas Alliance beyond just him, and is alone able to deal more destructive damage than all of them combined with one lightning spell. This single spell can blow away mountain ranges and easily deal with a city, if he wants to, like a nuclear weapon. And last but not least, he is chosen by the waves of destiny to be able to read the Rook, which is the will of the world, making him situationally omniscient. All of these canonically insane feats kind of just add up to make him cool, strong, and entertaining to watch. None of these combat aspects match up to his novel ideal about the world or his dedication. But I bet if he wanted to, he could blow up the moon at his introduction to the Magi story. Sinbad is a player at the world stage of Magi because of his incredible achievements throughout his life, and the story in the prequel manga, which leads up to the present events. There is a very large time gap between them, which is 12 years, including all of the time that passes in the adventures of Sinbad, which is 20 years. So there's a lot of story to cover, and we're going to start talking about the adventures of Sinbad, which is a less popular story, so I'll consider this a minor spoiler warning, because it's just going to go through the plot. But no matter. About that story, it begins with Sinbad's birth. But really, Sinbad is loosely based on the story of Sinbad the Sailor, which is a story set in the Abbasid Caliphate, which is in the same area as the Persian Empire, in the Arabian area, which is why in this story Sinbad is from the Partavian Empire, which is just Persia's equivalent. And this empire is built upon the conquest of its neighbors, and is in rapid decline because they are running out of easy neighbors to prey upon. Sinbad's dad is a military veteran, missing a whole leg from his service in the war, and is offered great riches as a military hero. But he declines it all, since he's a fisherman in the poor town with his wife and his son Sinbad. Sinbad is a man of the sea, through and through, thanks to his dad. Since Sinbad snuck onto the fishing dinghy at the age of 2, since he wanted to see what his dad was doing, where he first used his power to see the waves of fate, to avoid a major storm that his fishing Master Dad did not see coming, and this enamored Sinbad with the sea. But his only heart was even more focused on this lusting for adventure. Because, around this time, at the age of 2 or 3, his family took in an injured spy of a neighboring country, who they didn't know was a spy at the time, but, it doesn't matter, who told Sinbad all sorts of tales of great adventure, which set his young heart on an adventure of his own. The young teenage Sinbad met a Magi named Yunnan, a great sorcerer of creation, who saw his potential to change this era of the world, spawning the Great Dungeon of Baal. This was the first dungeon of this age, and it was home to the lightning-spewing dragons, cavernous cliffs, and perilous ravines. It was said that the dying Partavian Empire sent over 2,000 warriors and researchers into the dungeon, for all of them to just die. No bodies could be retrieved, since the dungeon structure is actually just a portal to another world, with the only escape being the completion of the dungeon. This terrifying dungeon sends a squad of elite soldiers, at the same time as Sinbad, who sneaks his way into the entrance. Sinbad essentially solos the dungeon with his future best friend and current enemy, who he nicknames Drakon, showing off the power to the viewers that his ability to read fate makes him essentially invincible, since he can control what he sees so clearly that he uses multiple steam geysers to shoot himself up and kill the dragon that he is fighting, and then get to the treasure room and become a metal vessel user. He is bestowed with immense riches in gold, and more importantly, his first metal vessel, housing his Jinn, Baal, the Jinn of lightning, wrath, and heroes. All of which, as a theme you'll probably see quickly, describe Sinbad extremely well. His rise to fame is quick, but nobody knows the stories of Sinbad yet. There is a minor time skip, and when we next see Sinbad, he is in the Arctic region, looking for the Inchuk tribe, to make his first trade relation with them. In this arc, he conquers the dungeon Valifor, attaining his second metal vessel, holding the Jinn Valifor, the Jinn of falsehood and confidence, as well as making lots of new friends, which are Hinahoho, an Inchuk warrior that Sinbad gives confidence to become strong, and a group of Partavian assassins sent to steal his metal vessels, Jafar, Betel, and Mahad, who Sinbad exposes the falsehood of the assassin way that they followed, showing them how they really wanted family. These people join Sinbad's found family, as well as Hinahoho's wife, Rimuru, and Hinahoho's sister, Paprika. Sinbad gets permission from the Inchuk tribe's global leader to get exclusive trade rights with them to New Trading Company, which is the Sindria Trading Company, which has not been established yet, which is really stupid, because Sinbad is sometimes a little bit dumb, and he just asks for trade rights without planning anything out. He goes to Rem in an attempt to sell off all of this new merchandise, but is swindled by an experienced merchant. This merchant is the King of Balbad, and gives Sinbad the inspiration to write his book about the adventures of Sinbad, as well as create a theater show about using his new powers in a story that could even entertain a king such as him. This story begins his legend, and easily makes him the most famous person in the city of Napolia, selling out the Colosseum using his magic as dazzling special effects, enhancing his already incredible story. After, Sinbad gets more isolated countries to join his trade alliances from all around the world, which include Sasan, which is like a knight kingdom, where they're all like really pure, but they have incredible like minerals in their mountains that they live in. And Sinbad shows off his crazy powers to the ruler, who has a metal vessel, but isn't as cool as him, because his ability is just barriers. But Sinbad just destroys the mountain range right next to this guy, scaring the living heck out of him, and saying, yeah, I could have destroyed your whole civilization, but I decided not to. Now join my side. It's really cool. Um, and then they go to another isolated country, the Kingdom of Artemira, which is just a totally matriarchal society with all these like really powerful women controlling all of the sad men, who are also really happy. All the men are happy because they are working, doing menial labor for their wives, who they really want to make happy and have the spending money to get those little extra things. And it's a nice change on society where these men are doing the physical labor of taking precious minerals out of meat because the birds get the meat, which they drop into like crazy ravines full of ridiculous amounts of minerals, which are almost untapped except by them. So they have a lot of these great gems, which make them really rich. Sinbad's company grows at an extreme rate thanks to all of these connections he starts to make around the world with the rulers of these isolated countries, who were never a part of the world stage. They purposefully kept themselves isolated because that's what they wanted. And Sinbad changed that. He started to change the world. And by the time the anime ends, that's it. He's just connected the world a little bit. Sadly, this adaptation was licensed for streaming rights by Netflix in 2016 when it came out. But recently, in 2021, this license has expired in the US, so it's impossible to watch this series legally, which is so silly. So at this point, I want to move on to the Sinbad Adventures manga, which has, you know, a lot of spoilers and is a lot darker than what was previously talked about in the rest of the story, because it just totally shifts and is super dark. So here's your warning. The next arc has Sinbad's new friend, Drakon, protecting a princess from his country, Saradine, the spider general who is like a poison user kind of thing. And he goes in and tries to protect her, but is losing because it's just one of him versus lots of assassins. And he transforms into a dragon. In the original Magi anime and manga, he's just a dragon guy. But when he's introduced in this, he's a person, and it's pretty confusing. But it's because he gets the power of the metal vessels in him, and he just transforms into this dragon that can spew lightning permanently. So he's a lot stronger, very cool, except he's also a dragon, and that comes with a lot of problems, because now that he's a dragon, he has the greatest issue of he can't enter towns without people causing a ruckus and them finding the princess. It's not great. So he goes to Sinbad, like, they go through this awful, like, area, the Partavian Empire, where everyone's looking for them, and they escape. After some tough times, they get to Sinbad, and everything seems a lot better. And around this time, Sinbad tries to deal with this crazy woman who is in charge of the biggest company in Rain, and he's the second biggest at this point. So he gets an audience with her, and she tricks him into fighting in the gladiator arena against one of her guys with no magic on his side, just him, which he's very confident about. He has learned Magui manipulation, he's really strong, he can see fate, and he loses because he's fighting this tiny kid with red hair who is a part of the Faunalise clan, which is like this crazy strong group of people who are like 100 times stronger than the normal person. And he just gets one shot when he picks up a giant pillar and swings it at him, and Sinbad loses, and is, as the deal said, given as a slave to this top woman person. It's really dark, this section as well, and he is a slave, like a full-on slave. He is tortured in like awful ways until his mind breaks and the Sinbad that we know is gone. During that time, all his friends are trying to figure out how to get him back, which they eventually do. But at that point, Sinbad has already escaped because of this little kid, Masarar, and they beat up this woman. She's gone and totally like defunct because they show how terrible what she was doing was. But in doing all of that, they use like really awful tactics. And Jafar tells Sinbad, hey, what we're doing isn't good, but we gotta keep doing it. It's the only way we can stay on top. So that's just kind of what happens. The story like shows them not being good people at this point. A little bit more time passes, and they go into a dungeon in Egypt, helio-hopped, with all of his new cool friends who are all really strong, because now they have all of their own metal vessel powers that come from Sinbad. So they either have lightning powers, or ice powers, or whatever imbued into their weapons. But they're so strong that the dungeon that they go to in helio-hopped says, yeah, I don't care. Fight each other, and if you show me a good show, Sinbad will get this djinn. Which they are forced to do because he has brainwashing powers. Fights happen, it's pretty cool, and then the princess that he brought with him from Partavia, Saradine, realizes, why is she here? Like, she's supporting Sinbad, but she's still her own princess, so she decides that she wants this metal vessel too. Editor's note, a very important part about Saradine's interactions with Sinbad is that she is a princess with royal blood, and Sinbad is not. He's just a guy. So she convinces him with that in mind, that she is a princess, she has royal blood, she is a king's candidate. Sinbad is not. He's just a commoner. That's why this matters in the end. Kind of just forgot about it when I was thinking of this. So, yeah. It's pretty cool. But this is the same djinn that earlier in this video I was talking about that brainwashed Princess Kogyoku. So how does that work? She had it here, but how does Sinbad get it? It's like a weird, like, kind of mystery situation where how does he get it? He kind of says that it was given to him, but that doesn't make sense. How do you give your powers to someone? Sinbad then becomes friends with the new Prime Minister of the Partavian Empire, who's kind of acting like a communist situation out of nowhere. Like, they have elections for a president, but isn't real. They have he's the Prime Minister, but he's basically just a military general. And he gives Sinbad, after lots of friendship happenings and them making lots of deals together, an island. And this island will become Sinbad's country. It was his wish that he had, that he wanted to create a country, and he was given it. And after a few years of time skipping, the city is about to be unveiled, and the Partavian military comes in to burn it to the ground, which they succeed in doing, because it's an island which was purposefully picked out because it is terrible to defend against them. And they come in, fight lots of people in a super dark arc where they kill a ton of civilians and multiple members of Sinbad's party, which legitimately, these deaths brought tears to my eyes even when I just looked back at the panels. It is super emotional, and that's how the Sinbad prequel manga ends. It ends with defeat. He takes on all of the negative will of all of the people in his country, and that's it. It's over. He then has the time skip to the current Sinbad, who is a really cool, really nice king. It's a crazy thing to think about, that this huge gap between the stories makes Sinbad's change feel more believable. Sinbad in Magi is conniving. He's willing to do anything to reach his goals. But that wasn't how he always was. He was idealistic. He wanted to just become friends with everyone. He had this weird way of doing things that didn't always work. But in the end, it seemed like it was working until it failed. The 8 great generals in Magi are different than they were in the Adventures of Sinbad because multiple of them died, and all of those people were the ones that were like adult figures, the ones that kind of had that reputation of being the cool, strong ones. They were the mentors. They weren't always his favorite friends, but they were the mentors. It's crazy how close the 8 generals are in the actual Magi series to how they act in the prequel story. It kind of like, you don't see that much change in them. You don't see that a whole, like the country they lived in was destroyed. You don't see it on their faces. They let you know that this was not Sinbad's first country when he like introduces them to his country. But it doesn't get the same weight that it should. In theory, because Sinbad moved forward. He now has people he has to protect, and he's gonna do anything he can to see that happen. When Sindria and the people in the Seven Seas Alliance swing around their vision, it's easy to see why all of these other countries had to give in. They're not strong enough to get through Sinbad. His incredible grief that guides his later life is so powerful and raw to them that they have to just kind of side with him. He's very easy to side with because he has this kind of like protagonist powers. He is the one that is chosen by fate. He is changing the world actively. He was sold into slavery at one point, lost so many members of his family, lost his country, but he's king now. During the later parts of Magi, beginning right where the anime ends, Sinbad really throws the weight of the Seven Seas Alliance around to change the world significantly. In a meeting with Aladdin, which is one of the main characters, the Magi, he's telling the story of the past world and how everyone needs to come together to fight the evil monster that's going to come out of the sky again, because they already fought one of those, but there's going to be another one. And who's invited? Sinbad and the Seven Seas Alliance and the Co-Empire. He is seen on the same level as the incredibly powerful Empire, which spans a whole continent basically, and he has a tiny island. That's how important Sinbad really is in this world, and what ends up happening is that Sinbad, the NATO equivalent, takes over China. In the revolt that Hakuryu sets up, it is 2 people versus a whole country, and they are doing okay, but they will lose by the end. Like, it's clear that they are not in a winning battle. And when they are about to lose, Hakuryu calls on Sinbad, and all of these people just teleport in, and not really, but it feels like they teleport in, and they win instantly. As soon as he calls for Sinbad's help, the fight is over. Everyone on the other side is overpowered in an instant. That is how powerful Sinbad's NATO alliance really is. And after this arc, where one of the main characters is killed temporarily, it's a shonen manga, they'll come back, there's a time skip, which leads to the final arc of the story, which is, I think, the most important part for this video itself, because it changes the way the world works, and it's almost all because of Sinbad. As I was saying, because of plot, the main character, Alibaba Saluja, son of King Rashid, who was Sinbad's mentor, died because of a spirit-cutting scythe. Doesn't matter too much. But he comes back 3 years later, way stronger, without his metal vessel, but still way stronger, just like Sinbad did. He comes back to this world in the same way that it felt that Sinbad, after his story, comes back into a new world. And it's changed a lot. Alibaba's journey in this arc is very similar to Sinbad's arc with his dad, King Rashid. But now, Sinbad is the important man who is a key figure in the world, unlike before, where Sinbad was learning how to go through and start his company and then become a great power in the world. Now it's Alibaba doing a very similar feeling thing. The world has changed so much because of magic. Sinbad has created a semi-modern society from this ancient world. It is explained that after Sinbad's alliance with the Ko-Empire, stopping that bloody war, they created a vault to hold all of the metal vessels in the hands of friendly countries so that no more great atrocities like that could ever be pulled off, making standard magician's magic, which is separate from Jinn magic, really important. Sinbad steps down as the King of Sindria to become leader of the Seven Seas Alliance, as well as the CEO of his own company, the Sindria Trading Company, which he already was, but he steps down to focus on that, because that's more important to him than his country right now. He leaves Drakon in charge of his country and sends all of his previous 8 generals, besides one, out back to their home countries where they become essentially their own kings and queens, because the old kings and queens are now members of the Seven Seas Alliance board, which is exactly like the UN, with the Security Council being from the original members. It's pretty cool. They essentially create the UN that has rules for all members that follow, and the first one is the abolition of slavery. The second is the abolition of military conscription. The third is opening of international borders for citizens to live wherever they want within the Seven Seas Alliance. And lastly, the creation of one international currency. It's actually not said what this currency is, but it doesn't really matter. It's basically like saying, hey, now we have just the dollar. That's what ends up happening. Sinbad had planned for this situation that he created himself and used all sorts of new inventions to wow the world and focus it on him, not just as a king, but as an innovator, as a genius. These are, to modern viewers, basically just modern technologies, like skyscrapers, cell phones, air blimps, video projection, which is used for news stuff. And all of this is accomplished with the help of magic that any normal person can use. They just kind of give it a little bit of strength, and then they can fly on a magic carpet around the whole world. It's as simple as that. It's like owning a car. And Sinbad makes so much money in this, and has an early monopoly thanks to his already influential status as the leader of this alliance. Sinbad remade the world as he wanted at this point, with no opposition. Technically, besides the Rame Empire, who didn't join the World Alliance, but also really heavily fell into its traps of shared economy because they wanted that. They just did a lot of the stuff on their own, but kept their own currency and kept their metal vessels. But it didn't really matter. They were still on the world side. They were very peaceful with the world. They weren't starting any wars. With the world bent to his whims, he controlled what each country did, and this allowed his technologies to be used in ways that increased, the productivity of those places, and it was so that Sinbad, as this great leader, could bring in a new age. Sinbad was so busy that his secretary, Jafar, which was, before his greatest general, had his own secretary, which had their own secretary in his giant skyscraper. His skyscraper is so impressive to all of the people who see it for the first time. They think it is greater than any imperial palace that they'd ever seen. It puts them to shame because of how magnanimously cool it is. All of this is established by Sinbad so that he can have attempts to enter the sacred palace, which is essentially heaven. It's like where the god of the world lives. And this is a canonical place, and it is not really a god. It will make sense later, but basically, Sinbad, after all of this is happening, he sides with the evil sorceress that was just defeated by Hakuryu in his revolt against the Ko Empire. He killed the evil sorceress who was controlling everything behind the scenes. Somehow, she's back. And nobody knows why, but she's still alive, and she's on Sinbad's side now. A lot of this is shrouded in mystery, but it's first shown to the characters in the world itself when Aladdin is attacked by the evil witch, and Sinbad shows up and just kind of comes in and fights with her for a little bit, is trying to get Aladdin to join his side. And this will be shown with some 10 out of 10 voice acting from me specifically about this argument that they're having about the Sacred Palace and what's happening in the world, which I think shows how Sinbad is feeling so directly that I cannot summarize it since it does not make sense. I don't agree with what you plan to do. Why not? Aladdin, don't you want to save this imperfect world too? War, slavery, poverty, tyranny. Even if things improve for a little while, the cycle will repeat itself once the wise king falls. You've seen this happen around the world, haven't you? But we have the chance to break that chain if we use Solomon's wisdom to enter the sacred palace. And what do you plan to do there? Rewrite the principles of the Rook system. If I do that, misfortune will no longer befall us, and we'll be able to build a world that will be eternally blessed. Don't you think it's worth doing, Aladdin? Uncle, don't try to deceive me. I don't think the world inhabitants should be bound by your values for eternity. One day, when you have passed on, the people of that era should be able to decide for themselves what is good and what is bad. I cannot allow that. Why? Because I am the only one who can see the flow of destiny. I have been able to see it since the day I was born, to feel within my body the direction in which things should move. It's a power only I possess. Therefore, I must be the one to lead the way. Those born with great power must also shoulder great responsibility, Aladdin. Hasn't your entire life as a Magi been like that? I respect you in that regard. In the past, Ilallah was the one who held the reins. King Solomon snatched those reins away and let them go. Exactly! King Solomon was irresponsible. Just look at the state of the world. No one has a hold of those reins. and our world is in tatters because of the unending cycle of hatred and war. A single ruler is necessary. King Solomon abandoned his responsibilities, but I will not. After this heated conversation, the world completes its transformation to Sinbad's whims, with no real resistance left, since Aladdin and his friends leave, until Ali Baba joins the world and completely destroys what Sinbad created with his own power. It's just kind of under Sinbad's complete control. Nobody can do anything against him. No one dares try it. And their new world relationship between Ali Baba and Sinbad starts with being very friendly. It starts more like a family reunion. And Ali Baba takes that literally and says, "Hey Sinbad, can you treat me like your own son? Like my dad did to you?" Totally changing how Sinbad saw this person. He always saw him as a protege in some ways, but he never saw him like that. He never saw him as, "I'm your dad," basically. It's a really interesting thing, since Ali Baba makes incredibly selfish demands of Sinbad, asking for all sorts of things that Sinbad mostly goes with, which includes the International Alliance's huge debts for the Ko Empire, which they are about to default on, and then would have to give their full control of their giant landmass to the International Alliance. But Ali Baba asks very nicely, "Just don't do it," and then asks for a full year to get the funds to pay back the debts, and there will be no great world-changing event. Sinbad has to say yes in this situation. It makes the most sense, and he's being influenced by Ali Baba. He was scolded into listening to someone else for once. Ali Baba goes around the world as the new Prime Minister of Ko and sells all of these great technologies, like teleportation circles, which were in direct competition with Sinbad's airships. And it's just a better product. Instantly teleporting somewhere versus like slowly going through the air. Sure, that was way faster than like boats, but it's not better than instantly teleporting anywhere in the world. That's way better. And Sinbad's put on the back foot. Because of that, he does his evilness again and spreads negative rumors about Alibaba's magical innovation of teleportation, because it's actually being used to teleport troops for a co-invasion of the world. He just fabricates this lie, spreads it around as a business rival, and it works. All of the people that Alibaba got to his side temporarily have to side with Sinbad. But this is put to a quick end when they realize, wait a second, teleportation's really good, and everyone wants it. The witch that was sided with Sinbad has possessed a key character, a princess from Ko, which is her daughter, Hakuei, and is Sinbad's new right-hand man. And after the witch's defeat by all of the main characters, Sinbad just admits defeat, that he stands no chance against Aladdin and his immense power as a Magi without his own equally powerful sorcerer. And he asks Sinbad about destiny and what they were talking about before. Sinbad is a first-class singularity in the words of the story, and is the reincarnation of David, the father of Solomon, the king of the old world, and the villain. Sinbad has been able to hear David's voice ever since the fall of his first country of Sindria, until he stopped hearing it. These whispers have been nothing to Sinbad. He was confused by it, but it was never important. After a meaningful stop to the graves of the fallen from the first kingdom of Sindria, the people that you see die, in the story of the Adventures of Sinbad, their grave. He talks to the survivors, those people that met with him that he hadn't seen for a while. And they all tell him that he will always be their one true king. That they will follow him in anything he does. During this hard time, you'd expect David, this person who's apparently always been in Sinbad's ear, to just, affect him negatively and say awful things and whatever. But he just doesn't. He doesn't say anything, and that's more impactful to Sinbad. He stops talking to Sinbad, and it somehow causes Sinbad to go crazy. And he goes over the edge. He is going to the Sacred Palace, despite knowing that it's impossible, that there's a 1% chance of success now that his witch is dead, and essentially greatly weakened as like a little baby child person. They do it. They go into the Sacred Palace. He fights these like angel sphinx looking things, and he's losing. And it seems like he dies. But with the power of his jinn who supported him this whole time, they have power within the Sacred Palace, and they put him on top. They get him to the top of the chain, get himself into the Sacred Palace to fight the old god. And he wins. He confuses the old god. And the old god, Ugo, sees him as Solomon himself. That his will to change the world is real. After some chaos, the evil power that was hiding in Sinbad, David, comes out and is proclaiming, "Oh, I took over, blah blah blah." And he just gets stuffed away. He gets put in another world. This is where you find out about the hierarchy of the gods, and how Ugo, the old god, figured out how to use magic as a normal person to become immortal and fix it. He can choose whether he's the top of the world or not. And Sinbad becomes the god. But he goes back down to earth after changing the Rook, which is the will of God, basically. It starts off slowly, in these few chapters where all the people start acting really weird. They start mimicking Sinbad and saying some of the things that he was telling to Aladdin about destiny and how it should be, and how in 1,000 years he will be dead, but we need to protect those people. This way of doing it brings chaos. Not to the world. The world is very peaceful, but it brings chaos to the people that aren't affected, which is just the main characters of the story. They have to fight Sinbad and, defeat him as the god he is. So they go into the Sacred Palace and fight him, and he presents them with challenges. These challenges are from his past. He essentially summons his past selves to fight them, and they're fighting him, and the whole thing is about telling Sinbad of this age what their ideal is. The first djinn is the djinn of lightning, wrath, and heroes. This is what they have to try to portray to him, that the way the world works isn't full of wrath. That you don't need to be a hero to change the world. Stuff like that occurs for most of his djinns until Ali Baba starts talking to Sinbad in his challenge. And he summons all of the important people so that he can hear what's really happening. He summons the old god, Ugo. He summons Aladdin, and he summons the evil witch, Arba. And they converse about how the world should be remade. Sinbad was planning on eliminating the world with world-ending magic to bring it to the Rook so that everyone can be reborn in a new world where everyone follows his will of peace and prosperity. They were already doing that, but he needed to bring it back. He needed everyone to turn into basically just energy so that they could be reborn. And taking into account the layers of potential gods above them and verticals of other worlds next to them, this conversation which Sinbad focuses, he compares verticals of other worlds to countries with set borders that you can't get through, like an impassable border. And because of the influence of these four people, some of the four most powerful people in the world, besides him, he realizes that what he's doing is wrong, that he can't reset the world. And at that point, he is being influenced by Alibaba to try this new way, and he gives in with a smile on his face. Too bad that's not the end of the story. Chaos emerges from the plot, because the Rook does not stop. It starts resetting the world. David, the person that, they thought was defeated and stuck in another world, controlling that world, comes back. And he starts this world-ending magic. And there's very little that they can do. He is on an equal level as Sinbad. Like, both of them are upping their levels in the Sacred Palace, and it doesn't work. They're fighting each other with no end. They could have gone on for eternity, but the world was breaking at the same time this was happening. So all of the main characters go back, and Sinbad and David fight. Sinbad's goal during this ends up being to drain the Sacred Palace of its power by continuously using it to fight, which then, as its effect, gets rid of his influence on all the people who were being essentially eaten by those angel things he was fighting earlier. And they win. After crazy fights and whatever, Sinbad sacrifices himself as a symbol of what happened when one man holds too much power, and he defeats the remnants of David forever. In the world, you can see how it's changed. It's all broken apart because of the new magic, the new normal. And all of the people who knew Sinbad see his passing and try to follow his guidance. They are forever changed by him, and they try to change the world thanks to his great wisdom, not by enforcing their will upon everyone, but by doing the right thing and being good rulers. The strength of the Magi story comes from the clash of these legitimately interesting ideas that characters have about the way the world works. Not all of them are great. Some of them are just, slavery is really cool, so I'm gonna keep making slaves so that I can be in power. It's not the best, but there's a lot of more interesting ways. And Sinbad believes that wars truly begin from the desire to protect, and that even good people are led to battles to keep up the status quo. And he was one of them. People that are trying to change the world become true innovators, but once they have something to protect, once they reach a point of stability, everyone besides him stopped. All of the people that were Sinbad's greatest confidants stopped innovating after a point. He was left alone in his state of constant growth, and he tried to change the world, and nobody else could really stand up to him. They weren't on his level. He was worried about the people 1,000 years in the future and beyond. And that forward thinking is also his greatest flaw, leaving those he really cared about in the end, just trying to follow his will. He controlled the flow of destiny, but it didn't work out for him. Sinbad right at the end is reminded of why he wanted to change the world in the first place, to end suffering and strife. His goal is noble, but he tried to destroy the world. He is a flawed character, and that's why I think he is the greatest Chad. Well, that's that. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed my long rant about Sinbad, who I think is the greatest character in all of fiction. He's really dope, and I hope that my love of the character and the way that the story molds him can bring about more discussion of Magi, one of my favorite shounen works. It's not popular anymore. It didn't get a third season. The manga just kind of ended, and nothing else happened. So I hope that it kind of gets a little bit of a resurgence. Like, subscribe, comment, whatever. Now have a time.